Okay. Good evening. Welcome everybody to the joint meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee and the Salem Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee for Wednesday, April 26, 2023. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Milton.
Here.
Member Cohen.
Present.
Member Allen.
Here.
Member Tigan.
Here.
Member Vieira Brandel.
Here.
Member Nishioka.
Here.
Member Phillips.
Here.
Member Gwen.
Here.
Member Gonzalez.
Here.
Member Julie Hoy.
Here.
Member Nordyke.
Here.
Member Varney.
Here.
Member Chris Hoy.
Here.
Member Dixon.
Here.
Member Curtis.
Here.
Member Chirac.
Here.
Vice Chair Brown.
Present.
Chairperson Stapleton.
I'm here. Thank you. Will you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Vice Chair Brown, do we have any additions and deletions tonight?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do. I move that we approve the additions and the deletions.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mayor Hoy. Is there, Vice Chair Brown, would you go ahead and tell us what we got on the additions, and then we'll see if there's any discussion.
The additions are the action items. C, the errata. 3, and the information items, the staff report.
Great, thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Milton.
Aye.
Member Cohen.
Aye.
Member Allen. Member Tigan.
Aye.
Member Vieira Brandel.
Aye.
Member Nishioka. Aye. Member Phillips.
Aye.
Member Gwen.
Aye.
Member Gonzalez.
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy.
Aye.
Member Nordyke.
Aye.
Member Varney.
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy.
Aye.
Member Dixon.
Aye.
Member Curtis.
Aye.
Member Chirac.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Chairperson Stapleton.
Aye, motion passes. Thank you so much. We have public testimony tonight. We have one person signed up, Matt Hale from Ward 4. Go ahead and come on up. We have 3 minutes, of course. State your name for the record. Thanks so much.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. I'm Matt Hale from Ward 4. Thank you for the opportunity tonight to speak. Inflation continues to erode everyone's purchasing power and quality of life, and yet multiple new fees and taxes are being considered. Why not consider cost cutting or efficiency measures? George Washington University's latest personal finance index released last week found historically high inflation forced a quarter of Americans to slash their retirement savings and a full 12% to quit saving entirely over the last year, concerning researchers. This proposed general fund budget of over $185 million in expenditures where salaries, wages, PERS, individual account program, and medical expenses account for over 62.5% is too much. The budget has a projected increase in expenditures of 9.4%. Trim this budget and eliminate the need to burden Salem residents with a whopping 71.1% fee increase over the current budget. There's only 23 employees making well over $140,000 per year in salary here in the city. Just 23 employees could easily self-contribute to their PERS individual account program. Doesn't it make sense to ask these exempt management salaried city employees making up to $262,240 per year in the proposed budget to contribute their own money to their own IAP rather than asking taxpayers to do that for them? The annual savings alone is over $272,000 for just 23 city employees, almost enough to fund 2 full-time police officers. And according to PERS, the IAP is the second part of your retirement plan And 6% of your salary, whether contributed by you or paid by your employer, goes into that account. So I think it's high time to ask those 23 employees to self-contribute. In addition, to increase safety across our city and improve livability, add red light and speed on green cameras to 2 more city intersections on Commercial and Fabry, as well as Kubler and 27th Avenue Southeast. And perhaps the city could raise up to $800,000 per year towards the general fund. By all means, start communicating with Salem residents your plans as outlined in this proposed budget to dramatically increase the operations fee by 71.1% and enact more taxes, either payroll, income, capital gains, or some other tax. There's only 65 more days till July 1st when your operations fee proposal increase is projected to go into effect. Recall last year's community satisfaction survey. 64% said they were not satisfied, and only 14% said you were on the right track.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Hale. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Vice Chair Brown, we have some minutes to approve.
Yes, ma'am, we do. I'd like to approve minutes from April the 9th, 2023.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, second by Nishioka. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Milton.
Aye.
Member Cohen.
Aye.
Member Allen. Aye. Member Tigan.
Aye.
Member Vera Brandel. Aye. Member Nishioka. Aye. Member Phillips.
Aye.
Member Gwen.
Aye.
Member Gonzalez.
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy.
Aye.
Member Nordyke.
Aye.
Member Varney.
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy.
Aye.
Member Dixon. Member Curtis.
Aye.
Member Chirac.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Chairperson Stapleton.
Aye, motion passes. Thank you so much. All right, first on our agenda is action items, and Josh Eggleston is going to start us off. Thank you, Josh.
Good evening. Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. We have 3 action items for your consideration. They're erratas. They're to correct errors or misinformation throughout the budget document. The first one, errata 1, corrects an FTE count issue in the safe, reliable, efficient infrastructure. There's no budget impact. It just overstated by 2 FTE. The second Scrivener error is a correction for funding in the construction and the capital improvement plan. So both the city budget and the capital improvement plan. And basically, we needed to shift some of the SDC funding to a more urgent project. So it kind of cascaded a little bit some funding around. The third errata is for a display for the Cultural Tourism Fund. In the back of the book, in the financial summaries, we misstated the Cultural Tourism Board's recommended budget. So this errata corrects that display. Thank you.
Great. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none. Josh, and this might be for Dan Atchison if he's here as well. Do we need to have a motion for each individual, or can we do it as all together?
Yeah, all together is fine.
Okay, great. Vice Chair Brown, do we have a motion on the action items?
Yes, ma'am, we do have a motion on the floor.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Great, seconded by Member Phillips. Is there any discussion at all? Seeing none, would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Milton. We'll come back. Member Cohen.
Aye.
Member Allen.
Aye.
Member Tigan.
Aye.
Member Vera Brandel.
Aye.
Member Nishioka.
Aye.
Member Phillips.
Aye.
Member Gwen.
Aye.
Member Gonzalez.
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy.
Aye.
Member Nordyke.
Aye.
Member Varney.
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy.
Aye.
Member Dixon.
Aye.
Member Curtis.
Aye.
Member Chirac.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
And Chairperson Stapleton.
Aye.
And we'll just yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Motion passes. All right, and then Mr. Eggleston, if you could come on back up and give us a walkthrough on our staff reports in the information section.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll walk through them all together, and then I'm going to go back to the first one so we can spend a little more time on it. So we've collected Budget Committee questions and some answers for your consideration. We also give a summary of the Budget Committee actions for each meeting, so we'll update that for each of the meetings as you make changes or additions. In addition, the quarter 3 report for the financial report for the City of Salem and the URA are included. Last week, you should have received your capital improvement plan, your physical book that we'll be going through tonight. We'll also be focusing on the smaller budget book for the Urban Renewal Agency, and then a section for safe, reliable, efficient infrastructure in the larger book this evening. And I understand there was quite a bit of confusion this last week about the budget. I hope I'm not going to create more confusion, but I'm going to attempt to address some questions that were happening. A little hard to see. It is in your packet in the regular agenda. I went through a series of scenarios for the general fund. There were several requests for what the budget might look like in a few different pieces. The first one under item A, so it's if you're following along, it's question 5 in your staff report. And this scenario right here, just to walk through it, I'll orient you. At the top is the beginning fund balance or working capital. In your personal life, this would equate to your checking account balance. The second line highlights current revenues, so those are revenues for the general fund, property taxes, along with a lot of other line items. And then the total revenues. This line here for current expenditures with no new FT, one question is what the general fund would look like if there were no new FT added, and that's what this line is here. Unspent contingency, we budget $3 million in the general fund for when things happen. The prime example is the ice storm a couple years ago. We needed to be able to mobilize a lot of dollars, so that allowed us to access additional dollars. And then we're eventually getting reimbursement for those dollars, but you have to have it included in the budget. And contingency, you do have to go to council to access it. It's not just an extra surplus. You actually have to go to council for a specific purpose to access it. 2.5 savings. This gets a little confusing. We budget for every full-time position in the general fund, as you might imagine. There's transitions throughout the year. Or we go into the year with vacancies. So we anticipate 2.5% organic savings just with staff transitions. And that leads us to the net expenditures. The fiscal year impact is simply the difference between the total revenues and that net expenditure line. So that's how much you're spending or adding to fund balance each year, and then the corresponding ending fund balance, projected ending fund balance for each of the years. And this last line here is the fund balance policy. It's 15% of current revenues. And then these arrows in the bottom show council policy compliance for each of the years. So this is the one scenario. I'm going to go through each one just real quick. This 5B shows the general fund budget with the non-ops fee positions. So in addition to the proposed increase to the city operations fee, there were positions proposed to be added, and that's reflected here. Uh, 5C is the proposed budget scenario, so if you want to know what's in and what's not, the increased operations fee is as depicted here, $5.13 million. And it shows the non-ops fee added positions and the positions added with the operations fee increase. Just to make it clear what's added, there are no positions added in this proposal for the payroll tax. That'll come later when that actually happens. We have a requirement, we have to make good faith estimates. So we're projecting an increase in the operations fee. If that operations fee for some reason doesn't come to pass, if council doesn't approve it, we would do a corresponding budget adjustment at that time. There's two more. 5D, this is what the forecast looks like with the city operations fee and the highest tier of the proposed payroll tax. And again, this is just for illustrative purposes. There is no approved payroll tax. There is no structure that's currently approved. This is one scenario, but this shows what the scenario would look like. I got a couple questions about why the boxes are still red. It's supposed to solve the problem. And I'll tell you, we can't pull the trigger fast enough for this revenue source to solve the whole problem. But if you look in the out years, the fiscal year impact, the fund balance kind of dips down, and then it starts to come back up in the last couple of years of the forecast. So in the next couple of years, you return to policy compliance with the fund balance. The last item, 5E, this was requested by Member Dixon. This shows the forecast with no new revenues. It includes the unsheltered programs and then the deferred staffing needs analysis that was completed last year. That's 307.5 FTE that were identified both by external analyses and internal staffing analysis, basically to meet current demand across the city departments. That's $49.4 million. And I think I've said this before, this is just for illustrative purposes. We do not want to add 307 FTE to next year's budget. Even if we had the funding, there's no way we could accommodate that kind of recruitment effort. Happy to answer any questions on these items.
Are there any questions? Yes, Member Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Josh. Is there a plan to eventually add the 307.5 FTE?
There is not currently a plan under consideration that would add that many FTE. The current proposal that staff has presented to City Council and under consideration, it's a much smaller number to address a safe and secure community need, but it doesn't address the entire structure, but it does advance the city forward toward that amount. I don't think we'll ever get there.
Thank you.
Josh, would you mind taking the slide down so I can see the members that are online better? Thank you. Member Curtis.
Thank you. I just have a really quick question on C. I read this explanation about 15 times and I still couldn't really understand it. It says includes new positions not funded by the operations fee, an increase to operations fee revenue, I get that, and positions funded by increase to operations fee revenue. So the first phrase and the last phrase seem to contradict each other.
So I apologize for any confusion. So this is the proposed budget scenario. So these amounts match the budget book. So within that budget proposal is an increase to the city operations fee. There's increase to staffing not related to the proposed increase to the operations fee. So there's staffing directly related to that fee increase, and there's also other needed staffing proposed. So I apologize for any confusion. Yes.
Yes, Member Allen.
Thank you. I understand you already have a plethora of scenarios here. The one that seems to be missing, but I think I can back into it, is one that shows the increased operations fee and the FTE that corresponds to the operations fee, but doesn't deal with the FTE that is not related to the operations fee. But I think I can take number C and just subtract the $2.15 million. So I believe, if I'm understanding that correctly, that if we left in the operations fee and we left in the FTE that's tied to the operations fee, that the fiscal year impact would be something less than $9 million negative. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So if we just took out the FTE that's associated, that's, I would say, unfunded or funding source unidentified, we would still be out of balance, but it would be something just less than $9 million. Is that?
Yes, that is
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
I should note that if those positions were to go away, it might shift the proposal for the ones that are included with the operations fee. As the city manager mentioned, every position is included in the proposal for a reason.
Yes, Member Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Josh, one more question. Could you go through again the timeline for the city to start collecting the operations fee, assuming it's approved, and then the timeline to start adding FTE that are funded by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the proposal that council will be considering, along with all the other fee increases for the city in June, will be for an increase for July 1st. With an effective date of July 1st, people see it on their bill in August, and it would be paid in September. That's when we would first start seeing the revenue come in for that increased. As the city manager mentioned last week, all the new positions, whether they're funded with the city operations fee or not, would be held vacant until we have resolution on the full spectrum of our financial roadmap, the part 1 and part 2 of either the payroll tax or a different piece of funding. But again, there's no positions related to the payroll tax included in this proposal.
Lay down.
May I ask a follow-up?
Please.
So if again, purely hypothetical, if a payroll tax or something like that was approved in November, would you start adding positions funded by the operations fee in, say, January?
If that were the case, we'd begin recruitment as soon as the round 2 is in place, whether it's in November or a different month, yes.
Thank you.
Josh, could you talk a little bit about the city's credit rating? And from what I remember, this is going to impact that positively or negatively. And why should we care about that?
Really good question. I don't usually get it, so I'm happy to address it. So the credit rating is really important when we go out to issue bonds. We just issued $100 million of general obligation bonds for the first phase of the safety and livability bond. We'll be talking about that a little bit later tonight. What the credit rating does is, just really recently, it feels like it was just yesterday. In January, we met with Moody's, their rating agency. They take a look at our financials. They take a look at our annual comprehensive financial report. They take a look at our projections. They watched the January Budget Committee meeting and looked at the forecast document. One of the reasons that we maintained our current rating is that we were looking at considering new revenues. Our forecast by itself didn't do it. They needed some assurance that the city council, the city staff were looking at new revenues. We were able to maintain a AA2 credit rating, which is really good. We were able to get a really good interest rate and premium on our bonds. Another thing they look at is fund balance. So as you see that projection of fund balance depleting, that's very concerning when they see that, which is why they were looking for a plan to replenish it and maintain it. So it's a big piece of the conversation. We're looking to issue bonds 2 more times in the next 10 years to fulfill our general obligation bond plan, our promise to the community. So we'll be looking to maintain or improve our credit rating in the future.
Yes, Member Hoy.
Thank you for that explanation, Josh. Could you just go one step further and tell us what would the real world ramifications be if we didn't maintain it? What would the impact be?
So it would cause our credit to go down. If we were to get downgraded, that's a warning sign to investors. We wouldn't be able to get as good of offering. We've got 13 bids on our bond. It could be much less and it could be a much higher price. It just kind of depends on the market at that time. But what it does is it costs taxpayers more dollars. It also could impact the actual projects we're able to complete. If we were downgraded and we weren't able to issue $100 million and another $100 million within our current $1.20 bonded rate, we promised the community we'd maintain that bonded rate. We'd have to downsize the project list to fit within whatever we could issue. So it does have a real world impact on our infrastructure and our finances.
Thank you.
Thanks. Member Nishioka.
Thank you. In speaking to that, where would the
money come from that the extra interest rate, the higher cost for those bonds? Would that come out of the bond money, or would it have to come from general funds? Where would we have to find it?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So what would actually happen is instead of 100 million, we'd be able to issue maybe 90 million because our interest costs would be higher. Right.
Yes, Member Tyan.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'm sure we're all struck, but I'll be struck on Mike on option D, or scenario D, in which both the payroll tax and the operations fee are instituted, that we're still below the fund balance policy for the following 4 years beyond this budget.
Yes, that's correct. And speaking just a little bit more to that, if you notice, I am projecting an effective date if there were to be a payroll tax of January 25. The services wouldn't be added until the following fiscal years. We'd have 6 months of collections to see how the revenues were coming in before actually adding any services. What that does is it helps us bolster that fund balance slightly to maintain it. One thing, it does get pretty low there for a couple of years. We really need that to happen in January and to have that plan moving forward, and then to have a commitment to get back to that fund balance policy. In addition, this is just a forecast. We could have extra savings. Right now we have a pretty significant vacancy rate in a couple departments that does lead to additional organic savings. We'd like those positions to be filled, but if they weren't, it would lead to a slightly higher fund balance, which could help.
But probably not $10 million, which is what the first deficit of.
No, it would be in the couple $1 million range.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Member Crisway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Josh, I know you have the positions that would be added if the operations fee were to be increased. You have those budgeted in here. Are they budgeted at 12 months, 6 months? Is there any potential savings in there that we might realize that might help bolster that? Or how much did you budget? How many months did you budget for those positions?
So all positions are budgeted for a full 12 months. So there would be some savings from those positions. You are correct.
Okay, so because you've indicated and the city manager has indicated that those positions won't be filled until such time as a payroll tax or some other means is in place. So we would not be expending those funds for who knows how many months.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
This is the most conservative picture that you'll see for those positions, yes.
So it's reasonable to suggest that it won't be this bad.
That is correct. There could be some additional savings. In the inverse, there could be some massive overtime issues in other departments. So I hesitate to say it'll look better, but I would hope that it would, yes.
Thank you.
Member Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair. Josh, you're talking about those 11, said you got 11 bids for the bond. Can you share with us a little bit about the makeup of those entities that provide this kind of funding? And then if you can share who it is we owe money to, like who? Tell a little bit about who these entities are.
I don't have the specific firms in mind, but they're large brokerages in general. They have to meet certain requirements in order to bid. And then often what happens is they buy a large chunk of the bonds and they trade them very quickly. So if you look on the open bond market, you'll see a lot of City of Salem bonds owned by many different entities or individuals.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Yes, Vice Chair Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So CFO, I have a question, and it's about, I'm seeing a lot of red potentially. Have we been here before?
Interesting question.
I'm just curious.
I think if you've looked at our 5-year forecast, if you pulled the last 10 forecasts, yes, you'd see out years that were deficit spending. Generally, it's not year 2. That's not something we usually see. So I would say that the urgency is different in this picture than it has been in the past. One thing I would note, we were considering a payroll tax. It was going on a ballot. It got pulled in May of 2020. We were in an extremely similar position at that point. We received one-time funding for the CARES and ARPA funds that really helped bolster fund balance and got us to this position today. And that's what actually is in fund balance and able to carry us for the next couple of years until we can get to a better sustainable point for the general fund.
Okay, thanks for the clarity. And ARPA really helped us out tremendously. So now that all those funds are gone, do we have anything relative that could catch us if we keep moving?
No, there's no
There's no safety net.
there's no consideration for direct funding to local municipalities at
Okay.
this time.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Yes, Member Gwynn.
Thanks, Chair. My question goes back to Member Teagan's question. So assuming your predictions are correct and we are in the red, so what's going to be happening going forward? Are we going to be looking at an additional tax or revenue source that we're going to be asking? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So the red, in the instance where the payroll tax or another revenue source comes into play, the red is on the fund balance policy. So if you'll notice in the fund balance, it's still positive, it's not negative. So I've equated it to you're scraping the bottom of the barrel and then headed back up to meet policy compliance. So in that case, there wouldn't need to be an additional revenue source. I think we would want to create some reasonable restrictions, like organic savings go to fund balance until you're at policy compliance. Just some measures like that until we're back with that fully funded. Because what that does, just real briefly, fund balance, it carries us from July, August, September, October until we get our property tax receipts in November. We're extremely cyclical, and we have to have that fund balance in place to fund payroll until we get there. One nice thing about a different funding source than property taxes is it doesn't have that cyclical nature. It's more spread out, more with quarters. So you wouldn't see quite the same issue with cash going forward. So any funding we can spread out monthly or quarterly, it helps improve that cash flow picture. Did that answer your question? Maybe? Maybe. Okay.
Member Crisway?
Thank you. Maybe I can give it a shot. So basically, we have a policy, the city council has a policy that says we're going to keep 15% of all the money we get in the bank at any given time. These scenarios dip into the 15%, but they don't take us into the negative. That's the kind of the easiest way. And it's our policy, and the bond rating companies and other people look at that policy and they look how we are complying with our own policy and they make judgments about us based on that. But it's not putting us into the actual negative, because we by law we can't go into the negative. Hope that helps.
This has been a really good conversation. Does anybody have anything to add? Yes, Member Teagan.
I guess I would add the difference, the discrepancy that stands out to me is that based on the timing of your projections, Josh, that in fiscal year 25, only 11 and change is projected to be collected through the payroll tax. And by the time you get to 26, 27, it's, moving north of 30. So what's the basis of that projection only collecting 11 million that year?
So what I did is I took our reasonable projection of revenues based on what the Department of Revenue is collecting right now. I discounted it 20%, and then half of that is for the first 6 months, and the next year still maintains that same 20% discount. And then I returned 5% in the next 2 years of the forecast, which is why you get into that where you're building fund balance again. So we never get above 90% collections in that forecast. We don't want to get to the point where we're not going to see the revenue, but we're adding the services.
Okay, so I guess my question maybe more is about the timing of when the payroll tax, should it be approved by voters, would start.
So, I mean, city council hasn't made that determination, and or even what election.
Well, we're just kind of in the land of projection here.
Sure.
You know, let's just make,
say
make
you had
friendly conjectures.
You had a green light in November. I'm projecting we could start collections January of 2025. And that's what that forecast is based on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Tigan. Sorry, I got your name wrong. Member Quinn.
Last question. So do any of these projections take into account new construction that's coming online as far as property taxes go?
Yeah, a really good question. Yes, it does. It incorporates a 4.11% increase in property tax revenues. We get a statutory 3% with the current limitations with measures 5 and 50. That 1% accounts for new construction. I could spend a lot of time on this, but I won't bore you. One thing with our property tax system is you might think that an $80 million property comes on at $80 million. It does not. It comes on, they apply a change property tax ratio, so it comes on, depending on what type of property it is, between 50 and 70% of that property value. So we don't see the full benefit of those projects coming on the tax rolls. So that's why we only see about the 1.1%. So yes, it does help, but I will say 4.1% does not meet our needs for increased costs, even for current staffing. Our costs increase faster than 4.1%.
Thank you. Great question. Yes, Member Allen.
I'm going back to kind of a fundamental question that I've been having, and that is, based on what you're talking about with regards to the timing of the payroll tax and when the city would be comfortable in bringing those FTE on board, I haven't heard a scenario where those FTE would be brought on board before June 30, 2024. So I'm still at a loss as to why those FTE are in the budget that we are reviewing.
Are you referring to the city operations fee, FTE?
No, I'm not. I'm referring, I think of the 38 new general fund positions, I think 14 of them are city operations fee related and 24 of them are not. I'm going to assume those are income tax, payroll tax, whatever related.
No, some of them are just increased general fund needs for positions, and then some are related to the operations fee. There's no payroll tax revenue anticipated in the 24 budget.
Okay. All right.
And of the 38, I can provide this breakdown at a different date because it's spread across all result areas. It does get a little confusing, even when you're trying to map them. Some of them are transfers and movement from other funds that'll be reimbursed. So it's not a full hit to the general fund. We do have some reorg that's happening with the consolidation into community services. So there's positions coming from public works that we used to reimburse. So we're not reimbursing, but the positions are moving. So I can provide that further breakdown by position if that would be helpful.
Okay. So, the statement that I've made, and I'll probably be making it again, is first of all, I fully appreciate the fact that the city needs additional FTE in order to fulfill its mission. That's not a concern or a question that I'm particularly raising. But I'm continuing raising the question with regards to all of the FTE, the 38 new positions for which there are not funding sources identified for them. There's funding sources identified for very few of those 38.
Yeah, I appreciate the distinction. I will note that in the general fund, there's very little restricted revenue, so there's not a 1-to-1 ratio for revenues tied to positions. I think the one distinction would be our delineation for the city operations fee positions in this year.
The unfunded is reflected in the decline of the ending of the fund balance.
Yeah, understood.
Member Chris Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the dilemma, Josh, is it's difficult to understand how we're paying for those 38 positions. And it sounds like it's a combination of moving money, moving positions, But it's I think Member Allen's question is, how are we paying for those positions that are actually new?
So it increases the deficit is how they're being funded.
So we're spending into the balance.
You're spending into the balance, and it's reflected in the solution of sustainable revenue in the future.
Great. So I hope that helps. That we're basically spending down our fund balance to add those positions.
To the tune of about 50% in 1 year.
Any other questions? Okay, we can always circle back at the end of the night if we have more questions for you on this. But as of right now, it looks like we will move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is our public hearings, and we have James here. And James, I don't know your last name.
It's James Wharton Hess.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are going to be hearing from you about our capital improvements plan.
Chair Stapleton, members of the committee, my name is James Wharton Hess. I'm a management analyst in the budget office, and I'm here to present the CIP for fiscal years 2024 through 2028. This presentation does reflect errata 2 that was passed earlier this evening. So a capital improvement plan, or a CIP, is a 5-year plan for capital spending. Like a budget, the CIP matches expected revenues with planned expenditures. But unlike a budget, the CIP has a multi-year timeline, which is helpful when planning large expenditures and projects that span multiple years. Preparation of the CIP is governed by Council Policy C9. In addition, ORS Chapter 223 requires that projects financed by System Development Charges, or SDCs, be part of an adopted financial plan, and the CIP can be used to fulfill that requirement. CIP projects are identified in multiple ways, including via infrastructure assessments, planning processes, plan documents, and updates. For urban renewal, master plan updates, strategic action plans, and advisory board meetings provide guidance and direction for included projects. The city's various infrastructure plans, such as the Transportation Master Plan and the Park System Master Plan, are also important to the process and contribute to CIP development. So the CIP is noticed to the public in several ways, and often the projects that are included in the CIP are a part of a master plan or other process that does include outreach to neighborhood associations or advisory boards. The CIP website includes information about the CIP development process, as well as prior year CIP documents for review. And the website also includes a project request form that allows residents to submit projects to be considered for the CIP. These request forms are available year-round and can be submitted at any time. So that same webpage also contains information to help display individual projects. The GIS team, which includes personnel from Information Technology and Public Works, has updated the interactive CIP map, and that gives a visual representation of the projects by type and location. Users can click on project icons, and the project detail will appear in a pop-up box. Each year, a public hearing is held to receive feedback on the plan, and that public hearing is noticed through weekly emailed Salem Community Connection and the city's website. So the CIP development process is a key element of the city's overall capital planning effort. The CIP itself is primarily a planning document. It contains projects where likely funding sources have been identified, have a cost of $50,000 or more, and includes new projects or new funding sources. Projects that have been identified but do not have an identified funding source remain outside of the CIP until those funding sources can be identified. As the process moves forward, the year 1 CIP projects flow into the proposed budget, and previously funded and carryover projects contained in the current 2023 budget will also flow into that 2024 budget. So the budget will then include all year 1 CIP projects, as well as carryover projects, projects adopted mid-year, reappropriations, administrative costs, and smaller capital projects that did not meet that $50,000 threshold. So the majority of the CIP document is made up of individual project detail sections, like the example here. In the top left-hand corner, you will see the project number, which is how we identify each project. Under that is the category of projects. In this case, that's streets. Under that is the neighborhood association or neighborhood associations that the project occurs in. And below that is the title of the project. In the top right-hand corner, you have the score of the project, if there is one. And below that is the ward or wards that the project takes place in. Down in the funding section, you have the fiscal year, each fiscal year of the 5-year period, as well as the funding source or funding sources that are contributing to the project. Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a quick second.
Sure.
Could you go into a little bit more detail about the score? What is the score? Where does that come from? And what is it taking into consideration?
Sure. Let me bring up someone from Public Works who has a little more information on how that scoring process takes place.
Just real quick, I do think we need to open the public hearing. I'm not sure if we did that. And also, if we could move to public testimony after the presentation, then questions of staff.
Thank you. I open a public hearing. Never done that before. Okay, sorry about that, everybody, and thank you. So, question about the score. We're there. Is that where we're at?
He's wanting to do questions at the end.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, down into funding sources. This is each funding source that contributes to the project and the year that it occurs. Below that is the total for each fiscal year, as well as the total for the total 5-year period, all the way at the right. Under that is the amount funded in prior years, and at the very bottom is the total project cost, as well as a brief description of each project. So, before moving into the specifics of this exact CIP, I want to reflect back on some of the city's recent project accomplishments. In fiscal year 2022, 14 construction projects were completed, and that includes the Salem Public Library improvements right out here, as well as the ozone treatment facility project pictured here. My apologies. Additionally, 19 projects have started or will start this fiscal year, including the Union Street Family Friendly Bikeway Improvements Project. The project will reconstruct the ADA ramps and sidewalks, repave the vehicle and bike lanes, install new traffic signals, and install street light and streetscape improvement features. The 2nd Street Northwest Corridor Improvement Project also starts this fiscal year and will add curbs, sidewalks, utility lines, and improve streetscape features. So then, some of the projects worth highlighting for this CIP period are the McGilchrist Street Southeast Corridor Improvements Project, which will bring the corridor to minor arterial standards, including proper road width, bike lanes, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, and drainage systems. The project is partially funded by the federal grant administered by the Oregon Department of Transportation. The final phase of the Public Works Operations Building projects is included in this CIP, and work is well underway at the building, and that's expected to open in fiscal year 2024. So the 2022 Safety and Livability Bond has significantly impacted the scope of this CIP. This plan includes $169.6 million in safety and livability bond funding. The impact of the bond is clear when comparing the CIP to the previous plan. The FY24 through 28 CIP includes 63 more projects and $165.9 million in additional funding. So a quick overview of the CIP is listed here. It's $444.2 million, which is comprised of 217 projects, 24 funding sources, and 11 categories of infrastructure. The CIP document also includes a display of the projects by results area. Projects are attributed to 5 of the 6 total results areas, and there's more detail on that on page 10 of your CIP document. So this chart on the screen displays highlights by funding source. The largest funding source is the 2022 Safety and Livability Bond, followed by utility rates. The All Others category on that pie chart includes utility and transportation SDCs, donations, lodging tax, streetlight rates, radio rates, among others. The next chart shows CIP funding by the 4 major project groups. The utility and transportation projects make up the majority of the CIP, followed by smaller portions for community and municipal facilities. So here's a look at projects by category. The first group is community facilities. At about $31.9 million over the 5 years, it is made up of 2 categories, which are 4 historic structure projects, and 49 park projects. Next is municipal facilities, which totals $89.9 million over the 5 years and is made up of four categories. 3 airport projects, 14 building projects, 9 information technology projects, and 18 parking structure projects. After that is transportation, which totals $174 million over the 5 years. It's made up of 2 categories, 2 streetlight projects and 55 streets projects. Finally, the utility projects total $149 million over the 5 years. It's made up of 3 categories, 17 stormwater projects, 22 wastewater projects, and 24 water projects. That concludes the staff presentation for the proposed capital improvement plan. Representatives from city departments are available to answer any questions after public comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. And we have nobody signed up for public comment, so we can go right into any questions to staff. Yes, Member Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question on page 9. Looking at some of the grants, I wanted to know if the grants were competitive or not competitive, and especially for the grants that end after the fiscal year 24 and aren't continued on in 25 through 28. Can we reapply to them? Or are they just not open? Can we apply to other grants? Yeah.
Good evening, Brian Martin, Acting Public Works Director. Most of these grants are competitive. So for example, the RAISE grant, which is about a little over halfway down the page, that's a federal grant we got for the McGilchrist Street project. And I think we applied for funds 6 or 7 years before we finally got that grant. So yes, most of them are competitive. We also get grants through our local Metropolitan Planning Organization, SCATS. Those are competitive also. We compete with other jurisdictions within our metropolitan planning area. So yes, most of those grants are competitive. And they're not always one time. So for example, there's probably another type of grant funding. I don't know if it's still going to be called RAISE grants next year, but the federal government always has different types of grants that are out there. We receive requests or our notifications on a regular basis of, hey, there's a Safer Streets grant. Apply, you have a deadline to apply, or something for EV charging. So there's miscellaneous grants that come through on a regular basis that we do apply for. In fact, about a month ago, we applied for a grant for a mini street sweeper through PGE. So that's a recent one that we did apply for. So.
Thank you. James, it would be okay to take down the presentation so we can see the folks better. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Yes, please, Member.
Brian, do you expect, I know there's been a lot of bills passed at the federal level, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I don't necessarily see, and it wouldn't maybe make its way into the CIP because we wouldn't know it's not known today that we would be receiving those funds, but I guess maybe just to look out into the future a little bit, do we expect to see more of those kinds of funds come into the city that are particular to those sort of one-time efforts at the federal level?
Yeah, I think we could plan for that. We have submitted multiple grant applications in the last 6 months for some of them that came through some of those bills. National hazard mitigation, there were some grant fundings for some bridges. There are miscellaneous ones that have come out of those, and until that money's all spent, you can reapply for them on an annual basis. So if you weren't successful 1 year, remaining funds can be applied for in a follow-up year.
Great, thanks.
Yes, Member Phillips.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Brian, for being here. This is a specific question regarding page 55 of the streets part of the CIP plan, specifically in regards to McGilchrist Street. It looks like with the combination of our local bond as well as the RAISE grant that was previously mentioned, this project is about $35.5 million when it's all paid for. My first question in regards to this project specifically is, does this include the mandatory realignment of McGillcrest at 22? Or is it separate from that?
I don't believe funding for that project is in here. I think it's already funded, so I think that's separate from here. Is that correct, Alan? Yeah. We have a lot of public works here to help us out with some of these detailed questions, so I thank them for being
So the
here.
funding for the realignment at 22 in McGillcrest has already been accounted for prior to this budget?
So in the CIP presentation where the funding, once a project is funded in the CIP and it rolls into the construction budget, it sits in the construction budget. So there's a project in the construction budget for that intersection project, McGillcrest and 22nd. So that, and I don't know what the value is, it's probably about $8 million or so. So that's exclusive of what's here. These are good, the funds here are going to cover the widening of McGillcrest to the east of that intersection and to the west of that intersection.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that we've got the realignment, which was a requirement for a lot of the grants that we got, like the RAISE grant, to be completed. So we couldn't get that grant. It's my understanding we couldn't get the grant from the federal side of things unless we did the realignment at 22. So, I mean, I'm glad that this is finally penciling out and moving forward, but this does seem to cost more than we thought it did a couple years ago. The explanation that I've received to date is that those estimates were several years old, and then, inflationary costs as well. So I've also heard that these are kind of conservative estimates. Is that accurate, broadly speaking, that the estimates that thought it would be less than this total amount is due to inflation and due to just there were old estimates?
Yeah, so the McGillcrest project as a whole started probably more than 5 years ago. And I don't know the exact date, maybe it's 7 or 8 years ago. And so some of the costs were generated back then. Costs have increased significantly since then. We try to do our best to update costs when we can, but we don't always catch them. In these last couple of years, due to the inflation and the difficulty getting materials and the labor shortages, and the costs have gone up significantly. So that's reflecting some of the big changes you're seeing here. This has been true to, now you also mentioned that maybe these are inflated a little bit. This is based on our best information at this time. That 22nd Street project is going to bid this spring. And when we open the bids for that, that'll give us a real good idea of what it's really going to cost. So, we're basing it off the best data we have.
Okay.
Once that bid is open, then that'll be the best data we have. And hopefully these numbers go down a little bit, but they could go up a little bit too. We'll have to wait and see.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's a very important project. I know the city's been advocating it for 3 decades at least, and a lot of work has gone in the last 5 to 10. I just was trying to get a good understanding of what's been happening. I guess this may not be the time or venue, but I see that we do have community bond money going towards this. So I guess my follow-up question, which I could take offline, is does this seem to impact what our bond list would cover? Because the hope was the RAISE grant would diminish how much we'd get for the bond. But since it costs more now, are we looking at maybe not getting through the complete list of the bond? I don't need to take that answer now.
Yeah, well, and I can share that with
Okay.
you. When we were looking at estimates for putting the bond list together, we looked at McGillcrest. We had seen what the last RAISE grant application was. Didn't think we'd get it. We assumed we'll just go ahead and put that same amount into the infrastructure bond, but we had not updated the project cost. So when we went back through and updated the total cost for this project at 22nd Street, we realized, oh my gosh, there's a big error here. It's a lot more expensive than we thought it was going to be. Fortunately, we have the improvement, the safety and livability bond that we did allocate. That will get us through so we can complete the project. But I, like you, when we heard we got the RAISE grant, my first thought was, that's great news because now we have this extra funding available that could go somewhere else.
Thank you. I mean, this is more of a comment, but I think that not only is this a critical freight street, which is I don't know, local or federal designation, it also has the Salem VA and the local Social Security Administration office, and there's no pedestrian infrastructure there now. So I'm really looking forward to this finally being completed.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a couple to ask, but yes, Member Barney.
Oops. Thank you, Chair Stapleton. Okay, I had a question about public project requests for CIP projects. What happens to them? I mean, do they go into some sort of a pool and get scored, or what happens to those? Do they bump others out of the CIP?
So when we get a request from the public for a project, it does go into a folder, and then we score them annually. So when we look at projects to put in the CIP each year, we go through those projects again. We definitely score the new ones. Sometimes we'll look at the older projects. If a new project that was requested by someone scored higher than one that was already in the CIP but not yet funded, we would likely bump it up and push something back that had a lower score. So the CIP does evolve over time, so it's never the same each year because sometimes we get new projects, there's new needs in the community, and if they score higher than the ones that we already had in the CIP, say for example, there's a project that had funding in year 3 or 4, but we had a new project come in that scored higher, that year 3 or 4 project would probably move out to year 4 or 5, and then the higher scoring project would move up in its place.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great intro for me. So about the scoring, as James showed us on the screen, we have a score at the top of each project. Can you tell the public a little, like what plays into that score?
Sure. We have, for the different categories of projects, we have scoring sheets, and I'll give you an example of a park scoring sheet. Somewhat similar for transportation and utilities, but this happens to be for parks. So one of the scores is what relationship it has to other projects. So when we're out doing a project in an area, it makes a lot of sense sometimes to do the one that's right next to it, because you can get economies of scale, impact the neighborhood less by being there and getting it done at one time. So that relationship plays a factor. Projects that we can leverage outside funding plays a factor. So if a project scores and we can get some federal grants or some other state grants to help advance that project quicker, that plays into it. What level of service it'll provide, so how's it going to improve the service to citizens in the community by actually having that project in place. What council goals it meets, so depending on what council goals it meets, it gets a score from that perspective. What the public interest has been, so are we hearing a lot from the public? Is this important to the citizens? And then we have a social and geographic equity score also that comes into play. So those are the categories for a park, and there's similar ones, for transportation or utility projects as well.
Great. Vice Chair, did you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair. To follow yours, you just mentioned that we have a social geography equity.
Yeah, that's what we're calling it here. So it's criteria that gets applied, and with the parks projects, we use the Environmental Protection Agency. They have a social justice type equity that gets looked at, and then geographic location comes into play with how it sits within those areas. So, for example, you could have a project that maybe isn't in an area that scores high socially with equity, but it contributes to surrounding neighborhoods that have a higher equity score, and so those folks will use it too. So if it's a regional park, it can draw more people in than just where the park is situated in one district of the city.
Okay, so more my question is, and I'll just give you the context. So there are some people within our city that believe when there's a need in their community, they believe that their need just kind of gets put to the bottom of the pile, shall we say. And so when you mention the score, is there an equity lens that we're using that can help explain to some of our citizens, for example, if there's a project that we are going to fund that takes place in West Salem versus east of Lancaster, two different demographics. So there are some people believe that they're not seen. Can you speak to that, or somebody can need to speak to that?
Yeah, I can tell you that is being addressed, and Rob Romanek, who scores our parks,
okay,
he's very familiar with that equity component.
All right.
We have other equity components too for other projects that
okay.
We can share too going forward. So Rob, if you want to take a
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
Good evening, Rob Romnak. I'm the Parks and Natural Resource Planning Manager with Public Works. So I do have the pleasure to score the CIP projects related to parks for social and geographic equity. Currently, we use 2 data sources. One is produced by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and it's their EJ screening tool, environmental justice screening tool, and we specifically look at their demographic index that considers income and ethnicity and race. That is more of if you have 2 projects that are both scored pretty high, we use that to determine between the 2. So it gets almost a higher score for what is the other one we look at, and that is actually need determined on level of service. So what are the park facilities available in that community? So if we have 2 projects that improve the service that parks are providing in 2 parts of the city, then we're going to look at that demographic index as the tiebreaker, essentially.
Is that helpful? Okay. Okay. And I know that we are also looking at creating an equity lens for the transportation projects, and that's work that's happening tomorrow even for our subcommittee. So I would love to share that information with you and for folks who are interested, if you could tune into that meeting, I think it's going to be really good. Thank you. Councillor Hoy.
Thank you, Chair. My question is pretty simple, and thank you to Member Varney for starting in my theme here, which is to try to understand basically how this works. I'm wondering if these monies for these projects have anything to do with our looming deficit, or is this just a different bucket?
If I may, really good question. And no, not directly. So there's lots of different buckets of funding in the CIP. If you look at page, it's at the beginning. Page 9, it shows all the different funding sources. So the only funding that would contribute to the general fund deficit we've been talking about, if you go about 1/4 of the way down, it says general fund. So over the 5 years, we're looking at funding of $2.4 million. For next year, we're looking at 381, 536, 610, 585, 285. So those are the general fund amounts that are included in that deficit number we've been talking about. Oh, you're muted.
You're on, yeah.
Sorry for that, Josh. I wonder then, even though that sounds like a small amount of money compared to the rest of it, is there any project that should be put on hold to save that money? Just thinking practically.
Yeah, I appreciate the concept and the question. So a lot of the projects, and we can go into detail what those are, but some of them are IT infrastructure projects. For example, server arrays that are on a replacement cycle. So if you don't replace them, sometimes they get more expensive to replace later, and you put information and other things at risk. We did consider a lot of other projects that tried to get into that bucket that we gave a lot of no's to this year. So this is really a minimal amount for the general fund.
Thank you for that. And one final thing as to how projects are submitted or project ideas. I thought I heard in the beginning of the other gentleman's portion of the presentation that anyone can put in for a project year-round. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. There's a form on the website, and then they just submit that to Tammy Stars, who's the project manager of the capital improvement plan, and she will put that in for consideration when they start scoring projects.
Okay, and do those come, what percentage of those come from citizens, would you guess?
It's actually pretty low. And Tammy, I'm sorry. Thank you. It's generally a pretty low percentage. 3 this year. So citizens are not using that form on a regular basis to submit project needs.
Okay, not that I'm competitive, but as I went through, I was looking for Ward 6, and I want more for Ward 6. All kidding aside, thank you so much. I appreciate the help and the further understanding.
And Counselor Hoy, I would encourage you to start filling out those forms. I know I do for my ward. It's kind of fun. Member Tigan, you have filled out that form.
I was going to say, is that number 3 just for individual citizens? Does that include individual citizens, residents, or does it also include neighborhood associations? Because I think I would count for maybe all 3 of those.
I think that's all inclusive 3.
Okay, well, it also doesn't get your project on the book then.
So sometimes we do get project requests that just aren't possible. It's for an area we don't own or something that just there's not going to be funding for, something like that. But otherwise, they do get scored.
I guess I would like to just build off of Councilor Hoy's question, just in terms of how much of this budget is about the general fund. That answer stood out to me as well, that for what is actually going to be spent in fiscal year 2024, $381,000 is not that much. But I do think over the course of this plan, when we look at the bond, the $169 million in total that would be bonded to be accomplished, I think it also shows the relationship between effectively managing the general fund for a good bond rating and the ability to do the work in the CIP. The CIP, this is my favorite night. I do, this is my 6th year doing this, maybe 7th. I love the CIP. I love the promise that it holds for the city. But the idea that we would get less than what people thought they were getting when they agreed to be to put in for the bond, that really, I think, is pretty crushing. So even though the general fund is a small amount here, if we don't manage the general fund well, it really erodes the ability to do much of the work in the book.
Yeah, thank you. And this is why you and I are such good friends. We love the CIP. All right, Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I realize now that just raising my hand with my camera off, it's been up a while, but it's on me to turn my camera on to really make sure I get your attention. So that's on me. My apologies. Before I go further, I just wanted to declare a potential conflict of interest. The CIP has sweeping ramifications for the entire city. My family owns property in the city, so I like to declare a potential conflict because it could have a benefit or detriment to a family member of mine. So just wanted to get that out of the way. Beyond that, I really appreciate Dr. Brown's comments about the equity scoring. And from my perspective, I think our city is making progress on that front. And I really appreciate Dr. Brown's question. It's a powerful reminder of the importance of that. One example that comes to mind is that a community group approached the city offering to support a tree planting. They were willing to pay the money to buy the trees and work with the city to find a suitable place for a tree planting ceremony. And the city selected an underserved section of our city in Northeast for that tree planting, where we desperately need more tree canopy. So that doesn't mean our work is done, but I do take that as a step in the right direction. And the trees were planted, I believe, in Councilor Gonzalez's ward. So I just wanted to offer up that example and to just really underscore the words that Dr. Brown said. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See here. Oh, Member Cohen. I love all these questions, you guys. I'm having so much fun.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I saw a comment last week from a parent specifically about ADA compliance on sidewalks. And so just wondering if I can get an update on how long will it take for the city of Salem to be 100% ADA compliant on sidewalks. I'll use my own neighborhood as an example. It's a relatively new neighborhood. I live in the Woodscape area. And I don't know if this is a thing between the city planners and the developers, but there's a section where you have a new house, and it goes into Woodscape Park, and there's a sidewalk, and then it's grass, and then there's a connector to the Woodscape Park. and I mean, I can foot it easily, but it's not ADA compliant at all. And so how close are we to being 100% ADA compliant for folks in our community that need it?
Great question.
I wish I had a better answer, but I don't know if we'll ever get there. With all of the miles of sidewalks that we have and the limited funding sources that we have available to do the work on the sidewalks, and then looking at the lifespan of a sidewalk and how trees tend to uproot them, and it's a constant changing program. We inspect about, you see in the notes in our budget, about 30 to 35 miles of sidewalk a year, and I think we've got over 800 miles of sidewalk. And so when you think about the time to inspect and then locate where the issues are and then apply funding to it, we apply about $2 million of funding annually to the sidewalk program. And I know we have some statistics in our budget. We prioritize ADA routes, so that's our #1 priority. And over half the funding goes to ADA ramps and trying to fix the sidewalks where we know we have more people using the sidewalks that have ADA issues. We also have bus routes that we look at and trying to make sure that we complete bus routes. So the development process itself is checkered, and so it's hard to make people develop things that's not in front of their development. So we get what we can through the development process, and then we try to do the rest with our $2 million a year. So we're making strides, but it's hard to think we're ever going to get there unless we have some other significant program to do it. I will point out that the safety and livability bond did allocate funding for sidewalk replacements and sidewalk infill. I don't remember what the exact numbers are, but that's going to be a nice boost to what we're already doing. So that'll help out. So every little bit helps. But it is an ongoing need, and it's an ongoing issue as things change and facilities wear out or trees upend them, and we got to go back and do it again.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. I'll take a moment to ask them if that's all right. We were talking earlier about folks who request kind of smaller projects. You know, all of the ones that are in the CIP are really large projects. So where do all those smaller projects fall into the budget? You know, whether it's you know, a new park bench or something that's smaller, kind of one-off things. Where would we find them in this budget? And yeah, I'll stop there. Oh, your mic.
Anything less than $50,000 doesn't land in the CIP, so those small ones that are less than $50,000, if they meet the need and we have operating funds that we can use to do maintenance with them, we will do those things. So for example, the sidewalk program is not in the CIP, it's just done with our operating budgets. Likewise, we do small street repairs and fill potholes and do different things like that through our operating budgets. So any of these small things such as that, we would look at it on an annual basis and try and complete them out of our operating budgets if we can.
Thank you. Councilor Varney.
Thank you. I had a question about SDCs. How do I put this? It's my understanding that a project has to be on the 309 list to get SDCs, correct?
That is correct. However, we can update that 309 list if we see projects that are going to add capacity. So the 309 list, the project should be on the list to apply funding to it. However, if it's going to add capacity, and we often do this, we come back to council periodically and we'll add projects to the 309 list and fund them. So that list evolves over time.
Okay, do projects on the 309 list get a higher score than other ones?
Can I interrupt for just a minute? I'm not sure everybody knows what the 309 list is, so could we start there?
Yes, excellent question. So the 309 list is a list that we compile that of projects that add capacity to the system. So it adds lanes to streets, it builds larger water lines, it builds larger sewer lines to support more than a single development. In fact, one of the erratas tonight was for Fabry Avenue in South Salem. They have to build I think it's a 20-inch water line. Through the development process, they would only need to put an 8-inch in. but because our master plan says it has to be 20 inches, it's actually adding capacity to the rest of the area in South Salem. And so that extra capacity then is SDC eligible because it's, it's adding capacity to the system. So there are projects like that where we can go ahead and add it. So the 309 list was put together based on those capacity improvements, and it references, I think, a section in ORS that's under 309, and it talks about SDC projects. And so it concluded that, we'll call it a 309 list years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Yes, Member Phillips, and then we'll do Member Chris Hoy.
Thank you, Chair. So this one comment, I'm really happy to see the intersection on Commercial at Ratliff finally getting, started in terms of money in the budget. I really look forward to that section. It's one of the longer sections of Commercial Street that doesn't have an intersection. I think that it's long overdue. I know many people in Ward 3 and South Salem are looking forward to that, so thank you. I want to verify that the intersection at Hillficker and Commercial, I don't see it here, I may have missed it, but I think it's been funded and is either near done or in process of being completed.
I believe it's fully funded in the construction budget now. Is that correct, Alan? So,
okay.
So it's fully funded in the construction budget and in process.
Okay, great. That's good to hear. And then this is more of a question. Earlier, the public testimony tonight, one of the comments was that we could use traffic light cameras that enforce, speed and red light, compliance to increase our funds. Is this the part of the budget where we would talk about that? Okay. Would that be last week, or is it coming up under safe?
That's next week.
Next week. Okay. All right. Fair.
All right. Thank you, Member.
Thank you.
Member Chris Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Martin. I have a question about project number 1530. That is pavement rehabilitation on Center Street, kind of getting to Councilor Hoy's question. This isn't quite Ward 6, but it's really close. It's on the way there. And it shows, so it's on page 69 of the capital improvement project. So it appears that we're not going to be paving out there or rehabbing that pavement until 2028. I can tell you probably by August of this year, we're going to need four-wheel drive to get through there. And low-profile vehicles are going to be bottoming out because there's something really bad happening to Center Street out by 24th and 25th. There's something really odd going. How are we going to deal with that in the meantime? Because it seems like something's going on significantly that isn't going to wait till 2028. Do you have a plan for that?
I'll defer this one to Brandon Klukas, our street maintenance supervisor.
Thanks.
We have similar issues on some of our other streets, and I think our thought was to try and hold them together as long as we could. But Brandon.
Brandon Klukas, Street Maintenance Operations Group Manager for the City of Salem. In street maintenance, we have a lot of funding difficulties for pavement maintenance, sidewalk maintenance, and ADA ramps. Our current plan is to do the minimal maintenance necessary on projects that have already been identified in the bond for funding, because we can use our little monies somewhere else. So we would seek to Band-Aid those areas, like on Center Street Commercial by potholing or skin patching, but any major rehabilitation we wouldn't approach in those areas.
Do me a favor and drive out there.
Yeah, completely understand.
It's getting really bad.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I drove it today, and I thought of you.
I drive it every day, and I think of me.
Okay, I'm going to take the liberty to ask a couple of questions again. In the response to your questions tonight, on the second one, when we're talking about what happens when a project is no longer shown in the CIP, there was a sentence in here that said, in rarer cases, priorities change, funding is not realized, or insurmountable obstacles are discovered, at which time a project may be removed from the CIP. So my question for you is, who makes that decision? Does it go before council? Is it communicated to the neighborhood associations at that point in time? And maybe, how often is this happening?
That's an excellent question. I think typically those come up when we evaluate projects on an annual basis as we go through the CIP. If there are issues, I think I'll use the example of Niles Avenue out at Northeast Salem. That's been in and out of the CIP numerous times, and it's one that's been hard to pencil out from a funding perspective, and I think that's Northgate Redevelopment Agency up there. They have priorities, and sometimes those priorities change. And so we'll, from input through them or from them, we may make those changes. So in some cases, I think it could be an advisory board or citizens. In many cases, I think it's staff looking at things and having challenges come up and then reevaluating it through the CIP process before we get here. So probably not always the best public process of, hey, we're going to take this out of the CIP. When we do projects with our construction budget, when we have large projects come in or fall out, we bring those back to council and let you know, hey, we need project funding for project A, and we're going to take it from project B, and maybe we will realign those things. To my knowledge, we don't do that with the CIP.
Is there a process that we have? And it sounds like we don't really have a standard process that we go through. And I think maybe we should look at that. I think, this CIP, the reason I get so excited is, it's a massive amount of money that's going out into our communities. And this is projects that people are going to experience, and it's going to impact their daily lives. And if, they get excited and it's in the CIP, and then maybe they don't track the CIP, and then, what happened to that, right? I think there's also an area where we could get better at communicating with our public, because a project gets in 5 years, right? And we all know what happens within 5 years. People move in and out of an area, the area changes and is used in a different way. And so the funding changes, right? Obviously, the price will increase, and so then the scope of the project changes. And how are those changes communicated with those who are using the space and who are really invested in looking forward to those investments? I would love to see something in the future that maybe council could look at as a guiding policy for how we're going to communicate with folks on the CIP. I see you, Member Nordyke. I have one more question, if that's all right. What I would also like to see, and I think I've talked with y'all about this before, and that is we don't get to see the pie chart on modes of transportation. So I know that we have a lot of buckets for pedestrian. Obviously, I would love to see more. And we have, there's lots of projects where everything is all interwoven, right? But I think it's important to start calling out what I feel and really passionate about are bike projects, and how are we increasing funding for all modes of transportation. So I know I would love to see that pie chart of just telling our story. This is part of us telling our story, right? And as we become a multimodal city, we need to do a better job of really getting equity within those modes of transportation. So that's my soapbox. Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a couple of questions. I noticed that throughout the document, there are several references to excess of credits to the developer. And I'm just wondering if staff could just briefly explain what that means. I have a sense of what that means, but considering that it shows up over and over again in several places in the CIP, I think it'd be helpful for us to all be on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. So that project I referred to earlier on Fabry Road in South Salem, so that developer is required to build I think it's a 20-inch water line. I have to go back and double check. We collect SDCs for water as the homes are being constructed. And let's say we collect, I'm just going to throw out a number, it's not applicable to this. Let's say we collect $1 million. For any capacity improvements they build with that water line, they're eligible to have that $1 million refunded to them. If we have a water line that costs $2 million or $3 million, they're still adding capacity, and the excess of credits is paying the difference between what we can pay them through pass-through credits, which is what the builders pay when they apply for building permits, and the difference on what that water line would cost. So it's really providing them with funds to build that larger facility for capacity that we just don't collect from them and pass back to them. It's in excess of what that amount would be.
Okay, thank you. And then I had one more question. There's a 500,000 set aside for streetscape furniture for downtown on page 72 of the CIP. Can you just briefly describe what you mean by improving and replacing downtown furnishings and amenities?
Thank you.
I'm going to have to look for some help from
Yeah.
Ms. Rutherford on that one.
Thank you.
Good evening, Kristen Rutherford, Community and Urban Development Director. So as a part of the streetscape project that's underway, where we are basically replacing the streetscape surface and doing a bunch of infrastructure work underneath, we also have a component of that project that is procuring and installing new amenities throughout the downtown that would be seating, trash receptacles, those sorts of things. And so this is something that we are moving on to kind of a separate track from the actual construction of the streetscape improvements. But we'll need to go through a separate, kind of design and procurement process.
Thank you. Member Julie Hoy.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, I'm not sure who would answer it, but if we were to take on less projects, could we accomplish more faster? And I guess the reason I ask that question is because I hear from folks, well, I live on Center Street, and out where we are, sidewalk improvements were promised long ago, and it still hasn't happened, and I know that it's coming. But I guess my hope for the city would be that our citizens would be able to see us making progress quickly. So it may be an odd question, but I just thought of it. If we did less, could we do it more efficiently and give the appearance of actually accomplishing a lot?
So that's an excellent question. We typically try not to put more projects in the CIP than we can accomplish. However, we are getting backlogged with projects. So if you look in the construction budget and see the projects that are rolling over, there definitely is a backlog there. If we did less and concentrated more, so I guess you could look at it and say, we're getting a little bit done on a lot of projects, or we could get a lot more done on a few projects. I have a hard time explaining what I think would work better. I'm not sure. I'd have to give that more thought.
Thank you. And I think that's a really great place to kind of take it where I was going to go next. And I think that we need to continue this public hearing because I think that y'all have gotten a ton of information on this. It will probably spur on more questions over the week. And this is a really important document. And so we can all let that sit for a week. And so I would entertain a motion to continue this public hearing until next week.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to continue this hearing until next week.
Second.
Thank you. Second by Co-Chair Brown. Is there any discussion? Great. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Milton.
Aye.
Member Cohen.
Aye.
Member Allen.
Aye.
Member Tigan.
Aye.
Member Vieira Brandel. I'll come back. Member Nishioka.
Aye.
Member Phillips.
Aye.
Member Gwen.
Aye.
Member Gonzalez.
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy.
Aye.
Member Nordyke.
Aye.
Member Varney.
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy.
Aye.
Member Dixon.
Aye.
Member Curtis.
Aye.
Member Chirac.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Chair Stapleton.
Aye.
Member Brandel. Okay, thank you.
Motion passes. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Staff, I know that was a lot. It was a fabulous conversation, but we will pick that back up next week. And now we have Callie here to talk to us about the Urban Renewal District proposed budget for 2024.
Good evening, everyone. Callie Leinenbach, Budget Manager in the Budget Office. Happy to be here with you this evening to present the proposed budget for the Strong and Diverse Economy Result Area. The city's programs that support economic development as well as the Urban Renewal Agency budget will be reviewed together in this result area. Excuse me, and I didn't go. There we go. The Strong and Diverse Economy result area consists of both city and urban renewal agency funds. The city funds make up $14.4 million in proposed funding, with urban development, parking services, cultural and tourism promotion, and the airport comprising most of this budget. Program information begins on page 149 of the city budget book, which is the bigger one. There are nearly 34 full-time equivalent positions that directly contribute to this result area's programs. Salem's Urban Renewal Agency is a distinct corporation with the mayor and city council serving as its board of directors and the city manager as executive director. City staff, primarily in urban development, support urban renewal area programs through an intergovernmental agreement with the city. The purpose of URAs is to spur redevelopment within an area that might not otherwise occur without public investment. So there are 8 urban renewal areas. They're featured on this slide. From north to south, they are North Gateway, which is the largest URA at 926 acres. Riverfront Downtown, the oldest area, formed in 1975. West Salem, South Waterfront, which includes a portion of Minto Island. Jory Apartments, the newest and smallest, established in 2020. McGillcrest, which we've already spoken about tonight. Fairview, which is no longer collecting tax increment, and Mill Creek. There are 4 funds that make up the URA budget. The first is the Tax Allocation Bond Fund, or Debt Service Fund. This is beginning on page 13 of the Urban Renewal Agency budget book, which is the smaller one. This includes tax increment revenues realized in each urban renewal area. The expenditure budget for this fund is $22.5 million. The Tax Allocation Improvement Fund, or Capital Improvement Fund, begins on page 23. And this fund receives the proceeds from long-term and short-term borrowings in the debt fund to pay for construction and improvement projects. The total expenditure budget proposed for 2024 is $94.1 million. Details about projects in each urban renewal area are included under the Capital Improvement tab of the URA budget. Operational revenues and expenditures of the agency-owned Salem Convention Center are accounted for in the Convention Center Fund, which begins on page 57. Revenues are derived from food sales and meeting room and equipment rentals from events and activities held at the Convention Center. The proposed 2024 expenditure budget is $4.9 million. When the Convention Center opened, the Urban Renewal Agency also established a gain-loss reserve to cover operating shortfalls or to fund repairs or major improvements to the facility. A combination of transient occupancy tax funds and income from Convention Center operations have been used to fulfill the $4 million goal for this reserve. Working capital to begin 2024 is estimated at over $4 million, as activity in the Convention Center has significantly increased this year, which is great news. The proposed budget is $987,000 for this fund. For workforce changes, there was a mid-year adjustment to the budget to support implementation of commercial air service at the Salem Municipal Airport. 5 staff were added during fiscal year 2023, but this is the first budget where these new positions appear. 2 of the positions will focus on security at the airport, while the remaining 3 positions will support operations. Most of the work within the Strong and Diverse Economy result area continues services traditionally provided, like airport operations, transient occupancy tax-funded programs, and economic development activities. Economic development activities also include partnership and support of the Strategic Economic Development Corporation, or SEDCOR. SEDCOR is a regional economic development partner who maintains relationships with large Salem employers. SEDCOR is responsible for business retention, new business recruitment, and manages the city's enterprise zone outreach and applications. Some highlights for this area include multiple phases of streetscape improvements downtown, as well as the streetscape furniture that was asked about earlier. These projects will update the look and feel of downtown, include design elements to promote tree health, provide more green space and seating, and improve visibility from alleyways. As mentioned earlier as well, funding for McGillcrest Street corridor improvements is included in the 2024 budget. The URA portion of this project is estimated at $7.2 million. Design and installation of a left turn lane from Silverton Road onto 17th Street is fully funded in this proposed budget. This project should improve traffic flow and increase safety at that intersection. Fiscal year 2024 will also reflect the ongoing operations of the city's 3 free parking structures. A study will be performed on one of these structures, Marion Parkade, to evaluate long-term repair and maintenance needs, with $1 million allocated in the budget to begin implementation of the recommendations of the study. And with that, staff are available for questions on this result area.
Thank you so much, Callie. Do we have any questions? I think you nailed it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, we can always go back to. Thank you so much, Callie. And then we have our next, sorry, I'm just double checking to see if anybody has any questions. Our next results area is a strong and diverse economy. Did we just do that one? No, yes, that was together. Okay, the next one then is the safe and reliable infrastructure, and Josh is gonna be doing that for us tonight.
Good evening. Again, Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. The safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure is the second results area we'll review this evening. The safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure sections begin on page 125 of the city budget for the operating side and 195 for the construction side. It's labeled capital improvements on the tab. This results area has a total budget of $154.5 million, approximately 21% of the total citywide expenditures. In addition, the construction funds have a total budget of $224.4 million, representing an additional 30% of the total expenditure budget. There are 285 full-time equivalent positions included in this area. And the services included are listed there: utility maintenance and operations, infrastructure project management, transportation services, streetlight services, and then also the debt service for our general obligation bonds are in this area also. There were 6 positions added to this results area to address increased demand or regulatory compliance. 1 program coordinator in water quality is proposed to continue implementation of the Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, lead and copper rule. The other 5 positions are to address additional workload from the 2022 Salem Safety and Livability Bond measure, as well as other CIP constraints, other projects that are in the pipeline. As you heard during the CIP presentation, we like talking about it. Salem Safety and Livability Bond passed in November of 2022. The passage of this bond was a huge step forward for the city's infrastructure systems. A long-term bonding strategy has been a conversation with the City Council, Finance Committee, and city staff for many years, well before my tenure with the city. This allows the city to plan resources and projects to deliver them effectively and efficiently. As you saw in the previous slide, the Public Works Engineering Division is staffing up to be able to manage and deliver these projects over the next 10 years. Transportation Services has several enhancements planned this next fiscal year with pedestrian intersection, sidewalk and street and sidewalk improvements. Some projects include downtown signal improvements, Union Street friendly bikeway, and Lancaster Drive at Watson Avenue pedestrian crossing. The water utility is continuing implementation of the EPA agency new lead and copper rules. A few project highlights include the continued slow sand filtration renovation, water main replacements, and the installation of seismic valves at the Fairmount Reservoir. For the wastewater utility, some highlights this upcoming year include installation of emergency generators at sewer lift stations. You might remember during the ice storms, we had to man those stations manually with portable generators. In addition, rehabilitation of the south secondary clarifiers and construction of an additional biosolid storage facility out at Willow Lake. The stormwater utility has several planned projects, including design of larger culverts on the west fork of Pringle Creek, replacement of the detention basin and main on Mountain View Drive South, and stormwater improvements on McGilchrist Street near 22nd. You heard about many of the projects that were completed this year during the CIP presentation. One highlight I'd like to make, since it is front of mind with the open house earlier this week, is the completion of the city's navigation center. This project was delivered by the Engineering Division of Public Works, specifically Luke Gamazel, and they did a great job with a lot of moving pieces and funding. On the operating side, we have included pictures of several sidewalks that were replaced throughout the last few years. Over 43,000 square feet of sidewalk was replaced, or 1,744 sidewalk panels this last year. This included replacing over 3,600 feet of curb and 69 Americans with Disability Act or ADA accessible curb ramps. Over the last 4 years, 198,000 square feet of sidewalk, or 7.5 miles, if all the panels were connected. With that, staff are available for questions on the safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure results area. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump in here real quick. I have a question for you. How many of the positions that we were just talking about, how many of them are linked to either federal or state mandates? And I'm not sure if you can answer that right now, but I keep hearing, EPA echoes of federal government agencies that are mandating things. Like I know street sweeping is one of those things. I'm guessing that our water and wastewater have all kinds of regulations. But when we start talking about people talking to us about cutting positions, I am also interested in knowing which ones can we not at all cut. Does that make sense? Is my question making sense?
It does, yes. I believe one new position is related to regulatory requirements. The rest are capacity issues for the engineering division. I would like to point out that this is the utility fund. It's operated as an enterprise, so a little bit different than the general fund with separate restricted funding. The engineering division lives in the utility fund, but it's reimbursed by all the projects that it manages. So those costs are built into the bond projects, and they get reimbursed to the utility fund to fund those other positions.
So would you say that most of the positions that we do have that are linked to mandates from federal or state programs are in the utility fund?
I wouldn't hazard that statement, no. Generally, there's a mandate for most services that we provide. So I can't speak to that more directly. There are some services that aren't mandated, but the vast majority are.
Okay, that would be interesting to know. Thank you. Any other questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So just to follow what you said earlier, about telling our story, and I think, and I'll probably say this again next week too, and the following week, and the following week. Telling our story, I think, is huge because we know that there's a lot of good work happening. We know that. We can see it. And we can feel it also, right? How do we do more of that? For example, we know that when it comes to some things that take place in our neighborhoods, that the neighborhood associations, they're there, right, as a way to kind of get the word out and share more of our story. But there are some populations that do not participate in those neighborhood associations, and we all know that. So how do we tell that part of the story? Like you mentioned about the sidewalks. I mean, that's pretty significant, but not everyone knows that. And so, and again, this is not up for an answer because we can pick it up next week, but I think there's value in telling our story. So I think, Mr. Mayor, we gotta figure that one out some kind of way.
Yeah, thank you so much for including so many of those pictures and telling the story of the really good work that we're doing out in the community. I love being the cheerleader for Public Works. I think it's fantastic. Any other? I know it's like an all-star team over there. Is there any other questions? Yes, Member Nishioka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so again, I'm a newbie, and I'm trying to. We've spent a lot of time talking about general fund, and then now we're seeing these huge dollars, and it sounds like they each have. We see the revenue sources, the different categories. But then I heard Mr. Martin speak about out of the operations budget, and it's like, where is that? Is that tied up into other projects? So I'm trying to understand the breakdown of some of these, where the money comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. So the result area sections, so the colored icons in your budget book, those are what we would call the operating budget.
Okay.
So those are 500 of the $700 million budget is operating.
Okay.
The majority of which is
You had us
personnel,
look at
it's people. The construction fund is under capital improvements, about $224 million. Within that, there's a lot of other funding sources, most of it restricted. You talked about SDCs. You also talk about utility rates. They're restricted to utility projects, things like that. In the operating pages, so specifically we're talking about safe, reliable, efficient infrastructure. I'd encourage all of you, if you're not already looking at the pages, you can see the breakdown by program for street maintenance. It's one nice thing about the result area and how we budget by program is you can see a higher level category. If you look in the back of the book, you see line items, mail, materials and services, professional services, gasoline, diesel fuel. You'll see the breakdown that way. The programmatic level gives you a high level view of what all those pieces put together make up. I don't know if that answers your question.
It tells me where to look.
Okay.
So thank you. I also noted when we were going through this proposal that the utilities is costing, that the cost is quite high, but it sounds like some of that was answered in the recent presentation about some of that was needing to come up to mandates that were being required with the water system, the new water system. And I think it would be nice to understand a little bit more about the all of the projects of water, I guess is what I'm asking. That we have the storm water, the wastewater, and water is very important to me in the sense of understanding where it's coming from, how clean it is, how it's delivered, what we do with the wastewater, and how we manage it. So I would like, and again, this is like trying to understand our projects and promote them, at maybe trying to understand a little presentation on some of the utilities so that the public understands all of the things that are needing to be done. That'd be helpful. I guess it wasn't a question, it was more an ask.
So just to make sure I'm clear, so kind of how the water system, where do we get the water, where does it come from, where does it go, that kind of thing?
It's more I'm wanting to promote the work that's being done, the necessary work, so that we have the services, and again, telling the story. So, and I'm just looking at water.
Understood. I would encourage you, if you haven't, reach out to Public Works staff. They can give you a great tour of Guerin Island. You can see the system kind of from the beginning, and they can show you some of the pieces. It's really interesting. It gives context to some of these large numbers for such a capital-intensive enterprise.
Did you have one? I want to highlight, I think it's in here. We have we're getting an award, aren't we? What's it for again? For our GIS? Could we just highlight that real quick? I'm trying to find it. Before we, it looks like we're ready to move on after this, but am I mistaken, Brian?
It's always good to hear we got an award.
Yeah, did I hear page 133?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, our transportation data collection and management.
Brian, do you want to speak to that? Mark?
Again, telling our story.
Mark Bechtel, Public Works Operations Manager. Yeah, our GIS section is really, and GIS means Geographic Information Systems, which is computerized mapping, geospatial analysis. And we're very fortunate to have a really, I call cutting edge group of analysts and technicians that do our GIS work. And they have been working very hard to not only just excel in the GIS arena, but to integrate that with asset management, to integrate that with overhead drone flights and imagery. And their work in doing all of that has earned them a SAG award. And for the life of me, I can't tell you what SAG means. There we go, Special Achievement in GIS, offered by Esri Corporation. And they're heading off to a conference that they normally go to anyway to get that award. And then we would like to bring them back and parade them in front of City Council when they get back.
That would be great.
All right, thank you.
We would love that. They got to work on their acronyms. I think we could come up with something better, personally. All right. I don't think I see any other questions on this topic. But we then open up. Cheers. No worries. It was great. Right? So it looks like we have one more item here, and that is just committee discussion. Any kind of issues or concerns that y'all are having that you would like staff to get more information on? Yes.
Can I go? I forgot to ask a question about the urban renewal areas. Sorry. I mean, and I think we talk about this every year, but this year it seems like we should talk about it again.
Okay.
Which is urban renewal areas are opened, and then part of the design for some of them at least is to close them and have that improved value of property tax go to the general fund rather than the urban renewal area. So I feel like in the past, Fairview has been closest maybe because they're not collecting increment any longer. But I wonder what the conversation is if there's a current conversation to close any of the URAs or how close that is, just trying to get a tenor from the city and the staff.
All right. Looks like.
On the way.
Yes. Kristen Rutherford will make her way up here.
I should have asked when you were up. Sorry, Kristen.
It is a very timely question, and this is a topic of information that we've been discussing bringing forward as a work session to City Council. I think we actually have one on the calendar for this fall to talk about all of the different urban renewal areas, where we are in terms of completing the goals and objectives of each urban renewal area, and where we are in terms of reaching maximum indebtedness. So for those of you that are newer to urban renewal, when you create an urban renewal area, the end point is tied to what's called maximum indebtedness, and that's the maximum amount of money that you can spend within the urban renewal area during its life. So it's not set to a date in the future and you hit that date and it closes down. With our urban renewal areas, most of them, we still have quite a ways to go to hit our maximum indebtedness. Some we're getting close to. The Mill Creek Corporate Center and the urban renewal area there, that's the one that is probably the next in terms of getting close to reaching our maximum indebtedness level. And when you get close to that point, then you have another decision point. So do you move towards closing it down and having that money returned to the tax rolls for all of the taxing districts, or you could go through a process to amend the plan, modify a boundary, or add maximum indebtedness, and do more work, right? So those are some decision points that will be coming up in the future. Our downtown urban renewal area, which was created in the 70s with a very high $315 million maximum indebtedness compared to a $25 million out at Mill Creek, we have a long ways to go and a lot of projects that could be completed before we reach that point. But just another thing to consider when you're looking at whether or not you want to close urban renewal areas is that revenue, there is revenue that gets, deferred to the urban renewal area. When you close it down, it's somewhere kind of between a third and a half of that revenue that comes back to the city. The rest of it goes to the other taxing districts that are impacted. So there is a benefit to the general fund, but there's also a lot of revenue that we forego that returns to our other taxing partners. So while we'll get more for the general fund, we're leveraging a lot more within the urban renewal area by having that in place.
All right.
Okay.
That's a very thorough answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our other taxing partners being the school district
Yes.
and other
The county.
right, other government agencies
Yes.
that would also benefit from, but certainly at the cost of the urban renewal area.
Yes, correct.
All right, Member Nordike. And Kristen, I'm not sure you should go too far.
Right here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, exactly. I actually don't really have questions for Director Rutherford at this point. But again, I want to underscore what one of my members just said. I agree. I feel that it is time for us to review our urban renewal areas and to see what the fate should be for some of these URAs, especially the ones that Director Rutherford mentioned. So I don't have a question. I just wanted to say I'm glad to hear that it's being scheduled for subsequent discussion. I think there are some areas in town that would benefit enormously from a URA. Areas of town that have been underserved and traditionally have not received a lot of support from the city in terms of infrastructure, sticks and bricks, and so on. So I welcome that conversation, and I welcome robust public comment and discussion when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have a couple here. We'll start here at the end. Member Allen.
2 minutes. She's already putting the red light on me. Just very, very quick, just a point of clarification, and I'm certainly not against any of the URAs. There is a maximum indebtedness, but there's not a minimum indebtedness, meaning the council can choose to extinguish the URA early. I just a clarification, because it made it sound like, it extinguishes when we hit the maximum, but the council doesn't have to go to the maximum before it extinguishes the district.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you. All right, Member Curtis.
I got to scoot over here a little bit. So this is not related to the urban renewal, but as a newbie and as somebody who certainly doesn't have the expertise of my colleague here, but I come from a career in public service, 30 plus years with state government. So I know, that the city or any government is essentially people. We don't manufacture something, we don't sell something. It's people providing services to keep our communities safe and all those things. So I just wanted to make a little pitch. And listening to the conversation about communications and also about equity, I think what I'm going to say is going to fit in well to those. We do have some severe revenue shortfalls. I get that. I had a great conversation with Chairman Stapleton today, and I learned a little bit more about it. But I want us to remember that any long-term revenue enhancement options that we're considering, payroll tax, whatever, will disproportionately affect those that can least afford it. And I just want to say that. And I know we all know that, but if you look at wages, in 2022, they increased about 2%. Inflation was 7.5 to 8. Utilities are going up. Northwest Natural, their average rate is going from a $14 a month increase to like $56 this spring. So, my point is where do us as citizens go when our expenses are reduced? If somebody loses a job or whatever it may be, we have to cut our household expenses. We can't go on that vacation. We can't buy that car. We can't buy the organic food. We have to somehow find savings within our own personal and household budgets. So I guess one of the points I'd like to make is I I'm not opposed to finding new revenue at all, and I think the city of Salem has great employees. All my experiences have been great with them. But I think as a citizen, and as we go out to communicate this to citizens, we need to show that we looked hard at cuts, or reductions in certain areas. Because if we just go out there and we say, we need more staff, we need this, this committee knows that, and we get it, and we get all the information. But, my neighbor, who may not have a clue what we do here, has no idea what the Salem budget is or where the funds come from or what's tax money versus federal money, we've got to communicate to them that we're looking at this like, kind of like they would as a household. So I would really push for that as we, get our communications out there, that we show that it's not just ask, ask, ask. There's reasons for this, and here's some of the results that we've had. So, invest with us, or be positive in investing with us again. And then just finally, I'd like to say that just personally, I believe very strongly that keeping investments in our homeless programs is vital. We've talked a lot tonight about capital improvement projects downtown, and in areas that are struggling with homeless. And so those two need to go together. Why invest in an area that nobody's going to go to if there's so much garbage there and people are so mentally ill that it's just not inviting? So we have to couple that message by saying that we're doing these investments coupled with trying to tackle this social problem. And I'm just hoping that we can have some really good discussions around that. We don't have a whole lot of time left to meet. But as I was going through, all these documents and trying to, match the general fund to the FTEs and all those things and trying to get a grip, on what's going on, I was trying to think of it from a citizen's point of view. So I would just leave those thoughts with you, and I think we can communicate, the good stuff that goes on in Salem, but I think we have to remember that people are struggling. They don't have the budgets they used to. We're finally getting out of it from COVID, and then everybody wants to take a piece of the money. So that's just my little soapbox and my 2 cents worth. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm not sure, maybe somebody didn't tell you, but you are responsible to educate 10 of your neighbors on the budget.
I love walking around my neighborhood. It's so much fun.
I did it at book club the other night. It was a lot of fun. Did you want to speak to that at all, or would you like me to continue? Okay. All right, Member Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I echo Member Curtis's concern for those who are least able to pay more. I think that's something we need to keep in front of ourselves all the time. I do have a question about the impact on the general fund of the financial assistance that the city provides for urban renewal projects. And it's something that can be followed up on later. But I do realize that when there are tax abatements, I believe that does affect the revenue that's going to the general fund. And I'd like to, if there's a way to give a clearer picture of what exactly that impact is, I would appreciate an opportunity to learn.
Thank you so much. That's a really fantastic point, especially as we move into more and more affordable housing and needing to partner with folks in order to provide that for our community. Member Allen.
As long as the CFO is standing up there. So I would just want to get clarification on a work assignment that you already accepted this evening, so I'm not piling on. But when we were talking about the FTEs and the general fund, I know that in speaking with some of my colleagues here, there's still some confusion, and so maybe in your response it can help clarify some of that. And that is with regards to the additional positions, which positions would go into effect or be filled? regardless if there was any utility fee or any decision reached on some sort of secondary revenue source, and then what would the triggers be for the other FTE? Because we've kind of heard what seems like conflicting information about FTE being held off until the revenue has been decided, but then no, some of the FTE is going to go into place. So I think we'd like some clarification as to when the FTE is going to be filled and what are the triggers for some of the FTE.
Okay, we can bring that back.
That sounds great. Are there any other questions or requests for staff? Yes, Member Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. 2 requests for the safe and healthy community. One for police chief. I know when we toured the building, I saw that there were 20-some vacancies. And so what I'd like to know is month to month from last fiscal year, how many vacancies you had, how many vacancies you project for this upcoming year. So that's for police. And then for police and fire, I saw that of the $6 million in overtime that we pay, about $4 million of it comes from police and fire. Understanding I was in the military, I know overtime is part of the job, but what are we doing to lower that overtime burden? How can we continue to decrease that? Because that's quite a substantial amount of overtime that we're paying. I mean, if we look at the city operations fee is going to be about $5 million, overtime is $6 million. Some people would say, well, just cut the overtime and you don't even have to raise a fee. So just an answer from them about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Josh, would you like to tell everybody what we'll be handling next week?
Yes, we'll be covering good governance and safe and healthy community. And I would encourage you, if you have questions, to reach out. We have one more week of where we're reviewing budgets, and then the following week is just for deliberations. We do have a 5th meeting noticed, but I don't think, generally when we try to do that, we don't have a quorum. So it's important to be able to wrap up in those two meetings. So if you do have a question, please get it to us. We do have a few questions in the queue that we're planning on bringing back next week. The vacancies are, one of them, we're actually doing it by quarter. Month to month, it didn't have much variation, but quarter was a little bit of a larger chunk. And then we'll bring back the other items as well.
Great. And it looks like we have one more question here from Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again to everyone for all your great questions and to the staff for the inveritable pop quizzes and other information requests that we submit. I always look forward to these conversations. I just wanted to point out that I have communicated with our CFO about the auditor question that I raised at our last meeting, and the information that we generally discussed with our chair. That is going to be on the agenda for next week because it falls in line with the good governance section. So in case folks are wondering, the internal auditor discussion will be part of a subsequent budget committee, and I look forward to hearing more about that and encourage public testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So earlier you had mentioned about, the scoring of the projects. Did we already ask the staff to share with us next week those projects that just haven't made it? And did we ask about the scoring to see more of that? Did you already ask that already?
I think the question was more to just explain the scoring here today.
Got it.
If you have more questions, maybe you and I can talk offline, or we can loop staff in when I don't have any answers, which is often. Any other questions? Seeing none, we are adjourned.